I've worked for a company called ASG Technologies for the last 13 years, and prior to that, I helped manage data for a very large financial institution for 8 years. And I talk to a lot of CDOs, so I've done a lot of work with Avanta. It's a Gartner company the year where I've met with CDOs and had boardroom discussions with them, so I hear a lot about the challenges that you guys are all facing out there in the new world of AI and machine learning and trying to get the data straight. And some of the problems are exactly the same problems that we've been having for a very long time. A way that they talk about it is in the terms of offensive and defensive data strategies. So for the longest time, we've had clients that have tried to organize and understand data from a compliance standpoint, from a legacy standpoint, and they're trying to modernize their environments and they're trying to go digital. And they need help from a data perspective. They're tired of doing it manually. They need more automation. They need more collaboration techniques to really put the focus on the new world of becoming that digital organization. So there's two mandates that we see out there constantly, and one is the mandate to be explainable, to be able to represent your corporation's data and understanding the provenance of that data and understanding how you're using that data. And it's not just about erasure. It's about being able to start to manage and own the data from that perspective. And what we're seeing is that the clients that have done the best job of that are getting just a whole lot more value out of the data just in general as a byproduct of having the right to be explainable, which I know you guys know all about. And then the second mandate is around sharing data. A few weeks ago, I was working with the federal government, and they are hiring, the U.S. federal government, and they're hiring 400 different CDOs across all of their agencies. So they have a mandate to share data now across agencies. And it's taken them 9 months to prepare their data to be able to share it across those different agencies. So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing. And what at this Big Data conference, what we really want to talk about is before you go out and create more black boxes behind those algorithms and behind your machine learning models, I want to be able to help you validate those models, clear away that black box, and sustain that information going forward. And we feel that the best way to do that has everything to do with automation, because we hear it from you guys all the time. Our data scientists are tired of wrangling data. We want them focused on the insights. And the more automation that you can put behind wrangling the data, the more you're going to get the good, cleaner insights. So just like you have to spend money to make money, we also need to spend time organizing our data to get the value out of the data. So I'm clicking my PowerPoint instead of this. All right. One of the ways that you can look at automating this management of the data has to do with an inventory. So sometimes we talk about taking x-rays of your data landscape. So go out there, automate the understanding of what's going on inside of those applications and how that information is moving from application to application. So really digging deep into the code, but not from a manual perspective, not from a spreadsheet perspective, but from an automated perspective. So being able to do an inventory with technology and being able to see data lineage from application to application down at that code level is what's going to help you automate the understanding of your as-is environment. From there, we talk about contextualizing the information. So being able to categorize your domains, being able to categorize data by product, by customer, and understanding it from a business perspective. So the more that you can look for technology to help you blend the business to the technical, the easier it is it's going to be for you guys to interpret what's coming out of your data environment. The next step is sustaining that information over time. So it's not just about defining who owns the data, but it's about how do I represent the data, how do I start to become a citizen of that data and democratize that data across the organization. So the more that you can do that, from a contextual standpoint and a tool standpoint, and you look for automated ways where we're using machine learning now to make that connection between the business and the technical environment. And there are tools definitely that are out there that do that. And then finally, sharing that good data. So from our perspective, if you're starting right away with the data catalog and you're sharing data sets without first understanding the as-is and understanding your inventory and your applications and what's out there and getting a hold on sustaining that information, you're spreading the disease. You're spreading the disease of data across the organization. So what we're encouraging folks to do is really understand your data landscape, contextualize it, sustain it, and then start to share it across the organization. And we're not saying that this is done in a and it's not moving. Okay. We're not saying that it has to be done in a linear format. We're saying that you can go out there to the different domains, to where you're bleeding the most, where you have the most critical data, maybe by line of business as well, and start to do that inventory, rationalize, govern, and share the information to value. So it's definitely a journey, and you can break it down across the organization. But the key is to share that information and understand that information across the lines of business. So you don't want a technology that's just going to look at the ETL around their ETL tool or their big data around that inside the big data environment. You want to be able to see where the information came from and where it's going to in a map all in one place versus just digging into one line of business or one application at a time. So what are some of these use cases? From an inventory standpoint, I talked about doing that data x-ray. That's what we like to do, is go out there first, understand what your inventory is, and you get things like an Amazon search on your data, being able to see both your business and your technical assets by just doing a search, seeing where you have a lot of redundancy. And some of our clients, when they start to do this, they say, oh my God, I got to clean this stuff up first. I have so much data bloat out here before I can actually get in and start working on those machine learning models and creating those models. I need to clean up some of this mess first. So this is, you look for technology that gives you quickly where is all my redundancy and where is my information being used differently and how do I sync that up. We also encourage clients to understand your critical data. So start with your critical data first and be able to start managing, tagging that information and tracing it as it's moving along from environment to environment. So data bloat and redundancy detection are the two primary use cases at this phase. And then next we have application analysis. So at that point you can also start to see the owners. Yeah, it keeps on slipping. Thank you. At this point, you can start to see who owns this data, what line of business are they in, and is this really truly a good authoritative source to be pulling my information from? So once you have that picture of your application, how the data is flowing from a really high level, you can do a lot of things from understanding if you're getting it from a good one or a bad source. You can also start to do some deltas. So as look for technology that allows you to look at the information on the fly while you're building the information. So if you have changes to your schema, you can do a compare, you can take a snapshot of that compare, you can go back in time and go, okay, as I was migrating to the cloud, what did my data look like? What went wrong? Did I bring in some data that maybe I shouldn't have? Don't just lift and shift, bring the data that's good, and make sure that you know when you brought it, because it will help you down the line. So we work with a lot of clients that definitely want to get it right this time with moving to the cloud, and they're using the technology to be able to do an impact analysis, to take snapshots as they're moving to the cloud, and also to start documenting the really critical archiving and compliance information and whether it's critical data or not before moving it to the cloud. Contextualization. There's a contextualization at two different levels, the physical level as well as the logical level. So from a physical perspective here, we're talking about data lineage. How many folks know what data lineage is, have used data lineage? Not very many. All right. So it has been a laborious process to produce data lineage. So if you're looking for a tool that gives you lineage, and first of all, let me describe what that is. There's several different types of lineage, and there's several different approaches, and I have a slide on the different approaches that are out there. But we want to be able to show you how the data is moving from an element perspective. So being able to see the rules behind why the data was moving and where it ended up and where it started from. So rules, where it came from, where it's going to. And you can do a lot of things with that. You can see if you have a big tangled up mess, it means that your business rule and your business policy has changed over time and time again. And we've gone off and done a bunch of projects around that data, and it's created a mess. So we have clients today that go out and just say, show me my most complex lineage and the calculations around that lineage, so that they can get rid of that bloat and make it simple and get rid of that, all the changes that you've made over time to that data. The other things that you can see are, when you look at it from a business to a technical perspective, if I'm going to change my right to erasure, any sort of policy or rule or business term around that, how big is the scope of that change from a technical perspective? So there we're looking at vertical data lineage, where you're going from a business to a technical perspective and saying, what's the impact on my data landscape if I change this policy and if I change this business information? So that's impact analysis and data lineage. For a long time, clients have come to us from a attestation standpoint. So that mandate to be explainable, they show the information to an auditor that, hey, yep, I know where this information came from. And instead of doing it in a manual way with spreadsheets, which has been the method for time after time, or throughout time, they want that in an automated way so that they don't have to think about that anymore, and it captures the changes as you're making changes to the data environment. All right. Govern and sustain. How many of you are doing governance initiatives now in your big data environment? Nobody. Oh, I see one. That's good. All right, well, over time, you're going to want to make sure that you're using the correct data, and instead of withdrawing data from your analysis, taking it out of your reports, we want you to be able to see that, hey, this is sensitive data, this is critical data, make sure you know where it's going and where it's coming from, and you have a policy right there, instead of hunting down your business folks to try to understand if I can use this data or not, and instead of withholding the data from your folks that are doing the reports. So that, in my CDO panels that I've had, that was one of the biggest problems, was that IT was telling them, hey, you can't use this data, you don't have access to this data anymore, and we don't think that that's the answer. Classifying the information. I have clients come to us a lot about, now that we're in this distributed environment, I have so many different BI tools out here. I don't know how the data is represented from this BI tool to this BI tool. Can you help me compare this? Can you help me understand what is this data inside of my BI tool and the results that I'm getting from that? Can you tell me what's in there and how it's being used? And that's what a good metadata technology or a good data catalog should be able to tell you once you do the inventory, what's in that BI environment. And then you can start to compare the different BI environments to make sure that if you're modernizing or moving to one or just trying to handle many different BI environments, you know what's going on with the data. I'm going to go on to the next one. And then finally, delivering those results. So anybody looking at data catalogs for the big data environment? Okay, a few of you. So what's a little bit different about a data catalog versus, say, a metadata repository? A data catalog should not just look at the metadata, it will look at the data itself. So it will do some profiling on the data. It will tell you what type of data distributions you have out there. It will allow you to store and manage your data sets. When I was at the federal government, like I said a few weeks ago, they had 240,000 data sets online for their end users to use. So being able to categorize that information, own that information, sustain those data sets, that's what a data catalog will give you. And it will tell you how to get access to the data, where that data is coming from, and help you own who gets that data and make sure that you're managing those data sets properly. They might have tools like Jupyter Notebooks that allows you to see it in a graphical representation of the data profiling as well as the metadata. And it has a lot of collaboration techniques. So instead of relying on a system or relying on other people, you can start to do things like rate the data, and it should have recommendation engines to say, hey, this data is pretty good, let's use it, and then that also makes you aware of what data is being used the most and if it's being used in the proper fashion. The other big driver and use case is validating the training data that you're using. So the data catalog should be able to let you understand what the different data samples are that are out there and what's behind the data in those data samples. So it should help you validate the information that's you're using for your training, your sample data. All right, so these are our most common use cases, is the folks that are going to the cloud want to be able to store centrally a knowledge base of the information that they're migrating and how they migrated it and where it's stored today. Finding the good data versus the bad data for the algorithms, extremely important. And how do we tell that? We define good data as data that's been defined by the business. At least it has a definition. The more linked and aligned it can be to the business information, the better your algorithm is going to turn out. And we want to make sure that it serves a business need. It's not just out there to be out there. It's something that a business person's going to understand and be able to use to monetize and find value in. And bad data, redundant, I already talked about. Data in isolation. If you have a bunch of data that's not being moved anywhere and it's not being used, there's probably no business need for that data. So that will help you modernize as well. Old, unused data and undefined data is usually how we categorize good and bad data. So the recommendation really is, before you start to do some of these use cases, really define your map of what's out there first today. And you can start from a high level, app to app level, and move down to that column level. One thing that we're seeing a lot of today is that the compliance initiatives are overlapping. So if you're a bank and you've done BCBS, you're probably a bank and you're doing GDPR now. In the States, we have CCPA, and just that mandate to be explainable seems to be everywhere for privacy data now. So it is possible to have one critical data element that's associated with many different regulations, and being able to understand at a glance how you're supposed to manage that data and what the rules are around that data is pretty important. We're also seeing clients that they look at the data lineage as information supply chains. So they want to be able to see all the different information supply chains that are feeding that report and categorize the health and fitness of that information supply chain. And one last thing that I mentioned was there's 4 approaches to doing data lineage now from the different vendors that are out there today. One is similarity in lineage, so being able to do some name-based matching and being able to use AI to say, hey, I think this data is the same thing and that's why it's moving to this particular application. Manual lineage spreadsheets are still being used today. Tagging the data lineage. So if you have an ETL tool maybe that does some tagging, they can derive some lineage out of that within the ETL tool, but that's still contained just primarily around the data of that ETL tool. And then finally, decoded lineage, and we're a company that supports decoded lineage because we actually look at the code. So we go in, we look at the Java, JSP, Hive, Scoop, data stage, those different jobs, and we parse it out and give you the data lineage in an automated fashion, so you don't have to worry about it. All right. And this is kind of a glance where you can go from that app-to-app perspective down to the element perspective. And in those diamonds are the actual code, so you can see exactly what happened to move that data. So with that, come by our booth, ASG Technologies, and we'll show you a demo. Hey, you guys have any questions? All right. Thank you.